know, the next legislature will oversee the redistricting of both state legislative and congressional district boundaries. How do you propose lawmakers avoid gerrymandering while ensuring that every party has a fair shake in each area of the state? That was one question.
I was asking.
Yes, one question at a time.
Thank you, my apologies. Redistricting happens every year after the census is completed, which will be in 2011. And I think it's very important that our districts be fair to all citizens. They're actively looking at these lines right now. It will come down to population. Each Senate and House district will be divided up by population, giving even populated numbers to all districts. I believe that gerrymandering has happened a lot. My district line is very crooked, and some people will be in my district on one side of the street, not on the other, but I think that we need to take population into account as well as economy, jobs, and it needs to be looked at. I think legislators will need to be a part of that process because legislators know their district, they know their constituents, and they know their constituents' needs. And all that needs to come into play when drawing these lines.
All right, thank you. The other question, in light of the recent court rulings regarding school funding in Arkansas, what do you propose that the legislature do to equalize school funding throughout the state school districts?
Could you repeat that again?
Of course. In light of the recent court rulings regarding school funding in Arkansas, what do you propose that the legislature do to equalize school funding throughout the state's school districts?
Well, as you may know, in previous years, we were in a court battle in the Supreme Court for many, many years. And recently, during my terms in the House, we are now providing an equitable education for all of our students in all areas, funding, facilities, and in regards to education, how many of you have heard Thank God for Mississippi? I know I have. I have a brother in Mississippi. And up until just a couple of years ago, Arkansas ranked 49th in education. Since I've been in office just in the past few years, we have went from 49th to number 10 in the nation, K through 12. And I think that's very important that we continue to move forward. 10 is not number 1, but 10 is a whole lot better than 49. And I think funding has a huge reason for that, and we are on the right track. When we do our budget, education will not be cut. It is in our Constitution. It will not be cut. And the students are the first and foremost important. We need to remember that. It's our students that should be and has been, in my terms in office, at the forefront of our budget. And I just ask that you continue to thank your teachers, support your schools, because without our teachers, we wouldn't be 10. And they have a hard road ahead, but they take care of it every single day. And I think teachers are very special, and I have been endorsed by the Education Association as well as the Arkansas Education because education is so important to me.
Thank you very much. The next legislature will oversee the redistricting of state legislative boundaries as well as the congressional districts. How do you propose lawmakers avoid gerrymandering while ensuring that every party has a fair shake in each area of the state?
Well, it's an excellent question. I went through this process 10 years ago when I was on the House of Representatives. There is a significant amount of federal case law that determines what is a fair district. It's basically the principle of one person, one vote. Every district should be as equal in population as possible. If you look at Arkansas, that is laughable. 10 years ago, certain Republican areas, and this is not sold against Democrats. I'm sure if Republicans had all the power, they'd be doing the same thing to the Democrats. But when you have one party controlling, like they did 10 years ago in the legislature, Republican districts are cram-packed. You have 10% more people in a Republican district than a Democrat district because they wanted to cram all those Republican votes into one district, and so they wouldn't have to impact Democrat legislative districts. That's not only wrong politically, I think. Some people deserve equal representation, but it violates federal law. Now, the good news is this session, I think, this coming session, I think there's a general recognition that what Arkansas has done in the past is unconstitutional. It does not provide equal access to your legislator. It doesn't provide equal representation. And I think there's going to be a concerted effort to draw these lines fairly, to draw them in accordance with federal law, and to avoid certainly litigation, which if we do it like we did 10 years ago, will happen. So it's going to be an interesting process. It's a fun process to be a part of because it is politics in its rawest form, especially the congressional districts. But while there's certainly politics in play, the federal law and the principle of equal access has to be paramount. And I'm hopeful and confident that this next legislative session, that principle will bear out.
All right, thank you for that answer. And in light of the recent court rulings regarding school funding in Arkansas, what do you propose that the legislature do to equalize school funding through the state's school districts?
Well, I think we have the first area of disagreement between Don and I tonight. While we have made great strides, certainly in funding, and the Lakeview case is certainly the impetus for that, I don't believe we have adequately addressed a lot of our kids' education needs. In trying to fix and answer the Supreme Court mandate in Lakeview, I believe the legislature went too far. They set an arbitrary number of 350 students, which there are certain schools in Saline County, Terry to be exact, which I represented when I was in the legislature, who academically was doing outstanding. And yet because they could not teach every class every year, not because they didn't have the teachers every, because they didn't have enough students to take every class every year, they were shut down. Bryant was generous enough to consolidate them and bring them in and do the best to provide for these kids. However, the result is certain kids in Perrin are getting on the bus at 5:30 in the morning and not getting home until dark. They don't have any opportunity for extracurricular activities after school. Homework becomes difficult, and when you get home at dark, it is not a sustainable situation. It works for most kids, but there are pockets in our state who are falling through the cracks, and we have to address it. Now, we have made progress. As Don mentioned, there was a ranking that ranked us as number 10. She did mention that number 10 ranking was based on programs. It wasn't based on academic success or any achievement. It's based on programs we've implemented, which we hope will generate some success down the road. But we have a lot of work to do, and we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking that everything's great. There's a lot of kids who have fallen through the cracks, and they're mostly in rural Arkansas, places where they already are disadvantaged because of the lack of all sorts of stuff. And on top of that, most of them are in poverty as well. And on top of that, we're putting them on buses for sometimes 4 hours a day and not giving them access to extracurricular activities and tutoring after school and all the things that most of our kids are able to enjoy. So I think we have to have a far keener look at education, and we have a lot of work that yet to be done. We've made progress, and that's due in large part to Governor Huckabee and Governor Beebe, but there's still a lot of kids falling through the cracks that we have to address this next session.
All right, Mr. Hutchinson, thank you very much. Mr. Hutchinson.
Thank you. During your terms in the House, your attendance wasn't perfect, and in fact, you missed or chose not to vote on quite a few bills, including to require background checks or confirm driving records for school bus drivers, to require background checks for those who care for our elderly, to require DNA to be collected from convicted felons, to reappropriate funds to our state military department, including our National Guard, to expand the offense of sexual indecency with a child, to strengthen the Sex Offender Registration Act, to prevent the misuse of Social Security numbers, to appropriate funds to the Saline County Fire Departments, a bill concerning the statute of limitations when DNA evidence is available, to exempt active military from the conceal and carry training requirements, to allow victims of sex crimes to be alerted of health risks their offender may have. There are some more, but I won't mention them due to time constraints. It is my opinion that when we choose to serve, that good attendance is imperative. based on your past performance and attendance, is this an example of how you will represent District 22 if elected?
Don, you've served in the legislature and you know better. I've got a better attendance record than Shane Broadway, if you count votes as attendance. To be an effective legislator, as Shane certainly has been, none of those bills are controversial. All those bills passed with overwhelming majorities. You're working your own legislation, you're meeting with constituents who come to the Capitol. There's a lot of work that's involved beyond voting. Now, voting is important, but Shane Broadway, I think he's probably the person we both like to try to model, at least have constituent service. I don't agree with every vote, but I certainly would consider him effective and extremely beneficial to the people of Saline County. And he'll tell you that there's a lot of other work that goes into being an effective legislator than just voting on bills that are going to pass and are non-controversial. A lot of those bills are budget bills that you've cited. And as you know, they pass them in large blocks, just one after another. You need to read all the bills because they try to sneak through. You've read the bills and you know that they're just general revenue budget bill that you vote on hundreds every session.
That seems to be a good place to call time.
This time?
Yes. All right. Thank you. Mike, I'm sorry we have to cut you off, but we must. You're running about 10 seconds over last time I let you go. But
oh, I'm sorry. The light is bright. I can't see
it's hard to see our timekeeper. It's really hard to see our timekeeper. I understand the problem. Now, your question for Representative Creekmore.
Thank you, Dave. Don, I know the state's gone through some tough economic times, and there may be a need for new revenue. You voted for every tax increase that made it to the House floor, including even the milk tax, a tax on milk. If you believe the revenue was necessary, then so be it. But when you look at the state's gone through, raised taxes, several $100 million in tax increases. We're still having to cut the budget currently. We borrowed $400 million from the federal government, and yet in spite of all that, those revenue issues, you voted to allow $5 to $6 million to be spent on renovating legislators' offices, building legislative offices, and building brand new Taj Mahal committee meeting rooms. When I was in the legislature, I put a hold on a bill to renovate Capitol Hill Apartments, which is where the legislature stays, and it was only a couple million. But it tried to be snuck through a land commissioner's budget, and I put a hold on it, and the taxpayers didn't have to pay for that. My question is, in these tough economic times when everybody else is cutting their budgets, tightening their belts, this legislature is raising taxes on citizens, how do you justify spending $6 million on legislative offices and committee rooms?
Well, I haven't voted for every tax increase that has come across my desk, so I'm going to have to disagree with you, and I think my record will reflect that. As far as the milk tax goes, that was not going to be a tax for the consumer, but for wholesale, and it was based on fear. Immediately upon making that vote, I went to the governor's office and was part of a team that went to the governor, and he agreed, and we found another avenue to pay for our dairy farms so that they would not be closed in 2013, providing our children with fresh milk. But for somebody that has claimed that you're the only candidate who hasn't voted for a tax increase, you well know that the word tax and fee is interchangeably used in legislation, and that you have voted yes for the following fee increases. Just for example, you've raised the fee for driver's licenses, for alcohol education programs, to reopen a court case, among other things. You've also voted for the emergency clause for different taxes, one being the 5% tax increase for rental cars, one being a 7-8 cent tax on certain services that went to the public, and you know that the emergency clause therefore says that you not only agree with the tax, but it's an emergency, putting that burden on the taxpayer immediately as to waiting for a couple months. So I have not voted for every tax.
The question was about the $6 million appropriations.
All right, actually time has expired, but I'm